we're going to increase the laws of shkita because this causes the least amount of pain.
But you can increase it as long as it doesn't violate any of the existing halachot. I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
It's when people start throwing things away and saying that this doesn't apply anymore, and instead of this halakha, we're going to institute another halakha. To beautify a mitzvah falls under this rubric as well. To elevate a mitzvah that was given to us that may seem dry, to be able to present it to very inquisitive people in an interesting way, in a progressive way, as long as it doesn't violate the actual halakha, then I think it's a cool thing.
Okay, well, let's test it when it comes to women covering their hair.
Mm-hmm.
One could say if a group of rabbis, or if there was even a particular rabbi who was coming along into our time and saying, even though historically women have covered their hair, who are from or Orthodox or observant, nowadays it's the typical standard that women don't cover their hair, and this is what the normal everyday woman does. Therefore, it's not immodest if a woman doesn't cover her hair. Mm-hmm. Because in the past, that was the reason. Typically, women covered their hair, and it was the woman of the night who would leave their hair uncovered. And so nowadays, I've heard Rabbi David Barhaim say, if there was a choice between wearing wigs or not covering your hair, what would you say? And he said clearly, I would say that they shouldn't cover their hair if they had the choice between wearing a wig or not wearing a wig. And then Chaim Ovadia also said, look, when it comes to issues of modesty, the verses that are typically used to speak about sniut are not really talking about women's dress anyways. And we should let women choose how they want to dress. And it's not a requirement for a woman to cover their hair. And there's nothing d'oraita that says so. Even the Rabbanan, it's, what's the phrase? I won't say the word dubious, but it's like, how does it apply today? So would you say that's taking away?
So I disagree.
From the halakha? If somebody were to say that they don't have to wear their head covering.
I appreciate Rabbi Chaim Ovadia's work. He's a little too much on the left for me. I think that a woman absolutely has to cover her hair nowadays. There's no ifs about it. Now, there is a famous rabbi that most people in the rationalist camp like to quote, which is Rabbi Mashash. So Rabbi Mashash,
right.
I mean, he basically said everything that you just said now. I don't know where he got it from. I read
That's where I got it from, because I looked hard and far.
Yeah, but in terms of sources, he didn't give a source to say why it's not allowed. He basically said, being that the vast majority of women don't cover their hair, we're in some way going to remove that obstacle. It's pretty much the same reason why people created this fake eruv that we have nowadays. The whole surat petak thing, these strings that al-pi halakha don't count as an actual eruv, but they're saying less people come to break the law of carrying on Shabbat without an eruv. We're going to create a fake eruv for them to feel that they're keeping the law. It makes no sense to me. If the Rabbi David Barhaim did say that, because I didn't know he said that, yeah. I disagree with him also in terms of that if a woman's going to wear a wig, it's better for her not to cover her hair. Nonsense. I mean, I think that a woman, if she has a hard time covering her hair, should be encouraged to wear a wig, because heard women say that covering their hair is one of the hardest things they've ever done, especially if they have very fabulous hair, right? So it's less strenuous on a woman to put a wig on. So I think that that's probably the most preferred hair covering nowadays. Clearly, a mitpachat would be greater, like if someone grew up religious, but for someone who didn't grow up religious and is adopting something that's not necessarily a rabbinic command. It says in the Talmud that Rabbi Yishmael says that to cover the hair is from the Torah. However, the understanding is how you cover is from the rabbis. So it's not unanimous that it's completely rabbinic.
Also, it seems that according to the Rambam, he calls it Dat Moshe, basically a law that we received from Moses, versus Dat Yehudit, which is more of a rabbinic or just practice of the Jewish people.
The notion.
So the phrase that he uses, and this is from Chaim Ovadia quoting from Rabbi Mashash, he's saying that the phrase that's used in I forgot the reference, but I think it's in the Talmud, where it's saying that hair should be covered. It's really in the Hebrew saying that she shouldn't go out with her head like disheveled, like messy.
Yeah, the term is Rosh Parua. Now, Rosh Parua could mean unkept hair, but I think generally the consensus is that it means uncovered hair.
Right, and so he's saying it's like a misinterpretation to say that it's saying that her hair should be uncovered, but really it's saying her hair shouldn't be unkept.
So that's one interpretation. This is why, like, if you go to Hasidic neighborhoods, all young girls will have their hair in braids because some people understand it like that. Apart from that, it does teach that hair is what's called an irva, a form of nakedness that has to be covered. Whether you're single, married, Shulchan Aruch says whether an almana, garusha, panuya, they all have to cover their hair. In terms of it being wild or unkept, that's a different halakha. But we do have the notion of a tefach. If it's up to a tefach, it could be shown. This is why in the Orthodox world, you'll see women with like the front of their hair showing about an inch of it, because it's considered, if it's a tefach all the way around your head, then at least according to Rav Moshe Feinstein is allowed out. But I mean, the halakha is a halakha. I'm not sure how they could get around that. Now I understand some people could take it more literal. Like the Rambam says that a woman has to cover her neck also, right? That there's something called a mitpachat, and then there's something called a redid, which is a head covering that darts on the top of your head and it wraps around your neck.
Mm-hmm. This is what we see many temaniyot wear.
But I don't know where they get this liberal approach. And for sure, Rabbi David Bar-Chaim doesn't hold to the notion that women shouldn't cover their hair. That's more of a left-wing approach in Orthodoxy.
Yeah, the video is titled "Are Wigs Kosher?"
Oh, well, right. So wigs may be a different thing.
No.
I'm pretty sure
that's where he said that, where he was asked if a woman came and said, should I go uncovered totally or with a wig? He said, of course, my answer would be that she should wear nothing at all, uncovered. And he said it directly. So that's where I was getting the reference from.
There's even an instance in Talmud Yerushalmi that it uses the word kaflatin. And the commentators write that this means wig, that they even wore wigs back then.
He referenced it, and he actually said that it's understood to be a wig, but actually it was like a hair covering, and they would put like a piece of like fake hair that would hang out for women who didn't have long hair or had their head shaved. And in our modern time, it would apply if a woman had cancer, for example. They would put like in the way that we know that's what it's really talking about is because the word is used for a corner, and so it's like. It's like this can't be referred. His words, and I'm not like I'm not Orthodox for one. So it's like I'm just quoting him because what he said, not so much that I agree with everything he says. But for two, he's saying that we know this can't possibly be a wig because it's referring to a corner, and it's just not the word he would use for a wig. Right. And so, yeah.
Regardless, he believes that women have to cover their hair.
And
I'm pretty sure that he also agrees. I'm sure he also believes that all women have to cover their hair, not just married women. I mean, even though it's kind of ridiculous to try to live in the Jewish world and send your kid to school with a mitpachat on, like a tichel, like some sort of rag on her hair.
Now, this notion, I know you guys see a lot, this idea of wigs and people burning wigs in kitchen sinks. Or I remember when I lived in Eretz Yisrael, and the Sephardim and Me'asharim would make mountains of wigs and burn them because of the way that Sephardim, or at that time the main Sephardi posek, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, felt about the issue. And one problem that Sephardim have, specifically Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, was the idea that they like to paskin for everybody. They like to paskin for Ashkenazim. And his students, i.e. Sephardi rabbis of today, continue doing the same thing. Which is why the average person who gets their Jewish education from YouTube 9 out of 10 times gets a Sephardic understanding of Jewish law, of modern Jewish law, which is why we pretty much just see him reiterating what these rabbis like Rabbi Yaron Reuven, Rabbi Alona Nava, Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi have to say on any issue without actually researching the sources. And this applies to what we're talking about, this notion of wigs. Because I've heard people say, how could Ashkenazim wear wigs nowadays when it's so clear? I mean, I heard Rabbi Mizrahi mention it. Friends, no, it's not clear. And those who wear wigs, who hold by their wives wearing wigs, have a reason to do so. In other words, it's not as clear cut as these YouTube rabbis want to make it. In other words, the understanding is that when the studies or the people who went to India to see where these wigs were coming from, yes, it's true that the hair came from women who were participating in Avodah Zarah. No doubt. But it really wasn't that simple. Because the final understanding outside the Sephardi world was that those wigs were still permitted because the cutting of the hair wasn't the actual act of idolatry. The study that the rabbis brought back was that the idolatrous practice was that according to this Avodah Zarah, it required the woman to make herself ugly before the idol. And that's why she was cutting her hair. It's not that the hair was offered to idolatry in any way. It's that the woman had to present herself to this idol in an unattractive manner. And the custom for them was to shave their hair off. Now, this hair was then sold to the sheitomachers, and they made shetilim out of them. And this is why the vast majority of Ashkenazi Jews still wear wigs. Of course, the women. But no, it caused the primitive mind to think, it's involved in any way with an idolater, then it might as well be idolatry. It's not that simple. But then one could say, Rabbi Asher, you just said it's involved in some sort of idolatry. It doesn't work like that. In other words, the vast majority of the world is involved in some form of idolatry. That's just a reality today and even back then. So to say that we can't benefit from anything that any idolater does is nonsensical and against halakha. It's because Jews have become too bored and too affluent that they get this urge to forbid the permissible. And another way you know that it's just hysteria is that these people who just walk around calling it avodah zarah are also against the use of any wig. In other words, if someone says, okay, I'm using a synthetic wig, assuming, giving them the benefit of the doubt that it is avodah zarah, if someone then decides to use a synthetic wig, it's still not allowed by their standards? So it's not because it's avodah zarah. And yes, the vast majority of wigs that people were burning, I'm pretty sure weren't even from India to begin with. But anyways, yes, I think wigs fulfills the obligation of covering your hair in the most modern way possible. Hair does go a long way, right? Sometimes you're in the synagogue and you see, like this beautiful head of hair, right? And it turns around, it's like the crypt keeper. So hair goes a long way. But yeah, hair has to be covered, in my opinion. And that's the halakha. I'm not for watering down halakha at all. And those who typically say that women don't have to cover their hair are on the left side of the spectrum in the Orthodox world. But I would say that the vast majority of rabbis believe in the Orthodox world that women have to cover their hair. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of rabbis' wives, if we want to gauge who are the representatives of Orthodoxy, if you want to say it's Orthodox rabbis, then the vast majority of Orthodox women cover their hair.
Could weave be a viable alternative in addition to the other options like covering and a wig?
Yeah, but a weave is a wig, isn't it? To a certain extent. You may see roots in the middle, but it's still like a wig. So yeah, according to especially Ramosha Feinstein and the whole notion of a tefach that you could have a little bit showing, then yeah. So you're thinking why women don't do that? Why don't you see women with, like in the Jewish community with like dreadlock weave? That's cultural appropriation.